It's not a New Life sermon unless the pastor messes with the thermostat at least once. You just gotta. Hello, everybody. My name's Anthony. I am the youth pastor here at New Life. You just normally do it. I first want to thank you for being here. I know that the Chiefs are currently playing. We're playing in Germany right now. The game started at 8:30. Does anybody want an update on the score? I looked just before we came out. You don't want it? No? Chiefs are going to win, probably. But also, I did want to say that at the beginning, just because I have worked in education as a sub, and I currently work in education, but I've also been a youth pastor, so I know what it looks like to have people looking down at their phones instead of paying attention. You will be called out. I am glad to be back up here today. I know it feels like you guys have seen a lot of me this year, and sorry, my wife cheered, and she sees me every day, so it doesn't count. Jason couldn't be here because he had to go to Kentucky to support his son in a very important Raiders competition, which I don't have the results of, by the way. I was trying to see if maybe we can get an update on results reading, but he didn't text me back. So just be praying for them, their travel home safely. We're glad he's out there and being able to support that. I'm glad to be able to be up here this morning. And so just before we get into today's message, just want to say a word of prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you for this opportunity we have to be here today and to be in your presence, Lord. And Lord, as we get into today's message, I just want to pray what Dan's already echoed, and that I just be a vessel for your message today, Lord, and that this not be mine but yours, and that hearts be open and minds be ready to hear. In your holy name we pray. Amen. So we have been in a series. This is technically the third week, but more the official second week in this series, on what it means to live out the two commandments Jesus gives us. Matthew 27:37-40, Jesus replied, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. And the second is like it, love your neighbor as yourself. All of the law and the prophets hang on these two commandments." So we're in a series on what it looks like in different parts of our lives to live out these two commandments. Jason last week did work, what it looks like to live these two things out in the workplace. We're going to be doing one on marriage next week. Well, Jason will be doing it. And then also mission. And so Jason, like he said last week, gave me my pick. And not that it hurt, but when I picked the one I picked out of all the options he gave us, he went, "Oh, thank God." Which, yeah, thanks for the vote of confidence, boss. I know you're watching. But it makes sense why he did, because when it comes to work, I haven't had that many secular jobs as compared to, well, Jason especially, because he kind of came from the oil fields and a bunch of different secular jobs before pastoral jobs. I've had them, but just not nearly as much experience. The other topic, marriage. I mean, I've been married for 2 years. Woo, so far so good. I guess in the room average, I am considered recently married still. So I probably couldn't tell most of you anything you don't know about marriage already. Daryl and Erica, what am I going to tell Ray about marriage? Probably not much. I won't have as much to speak on. But what my topic for is this week is what we're going to call non-marital relationships. And being a person who's been a son and a friend for the last 28 years of life, I do feel like I have a couple decades to be able to talk about that topic. That being said, that seems like a very broad topic, right? It seems like Jason was like, "Okay, I'll take work and marriage, and you get the rest." And I was like, okay, so these are relationships that include things like grandparents, like your relationship to your grandkids, parents to their sons and daughters, daughters to their parents, close, deep friendships that you may have around, close family members, like my wife Julie is very close to a lot of her cousins. So these close relationships that we have. And so that's kind of the kind of term we use today to kind of encapsulate all of these. Because if I tried to speak on every single individual type of relationship, we would be here until well after the Baptists cleared out of the restaurants. and we don't want that. And so that is going to be our term for today, close relationships. Most closely defined as the people who we let into our lives and let into our who we are a little bit more than most of the people around us, quite a bit more. Not, like I said, not spouses and significant others for this week. That's Jason's sermon next week, and I don't want to try to steal too much of what he's going to talk about. But when I think about like the close relationships I've had in my life, like of course there's my mom, my dad, both my brothers. They're a little bit older than I am. There's a 4.5 and 5.5 year age gap, but we're still very close. It's been harder to kind of keep that closeness as we've gotten older because one lives in the UK and the other one lives in Virginia. So trying to find that time to be together is difficult, but we try to make it work. My grandparents have always been a huge part of my life. My grandfather on my mom's side passed away in May, and my grandpa on my dad's side passed away in 2014, but both of them had huge impacts on me. Believe it or not, my grandpa on my dad's side was a huge gamer, and he's kind of the one who instilled that love in games for me. For those who know, he was a big World of Warcraft player, which surprised a lot of people that a guy in his 70s wanted to play World of Warcraft. But he got us to fall in love with it. My grandpa Cartwright, who passed away in May, huge basketball sports nut, what developed my love for basketball, played it my whole life. I'd play it now if these would let me. Last time I played basketball competitively, it was last year for Peyton's kind of family fun night for basketball, and went through the whole night perfectly, woke up the next day and could not bend my right knee. And I was wearing braces, ankle braces, did not help. My in-laws are a huge part of who I consider kind of in this group. My good friends, Mitch, David, Austin, all guys I met in college who I'm still very close with. My best friend, I've known him since birth, is Jordan Pacheco. I literally do mean since birth. I was born 6 months before him, and I haven't seen them in a while, but there are pictures of his mom holding me while she's pregnant with him. We've known each other since he was born. Actually, she almost dropped me once, but we ignore that. Sorry, Trixie. But those people in our lives that we just let in on more than the rest of the world around us. The kind of people that, I don't know, if you had an embarrassing incident at a gun range, they would post your picture to their entire church and leave it up for far too long. I'm not making fun of you, Joseph. I'm more making fun of your dad. But they're people I share my life with, my concerns and my worries, the first people to know good or bad news when it happens, the people who have all the dirt on me. So I brought up my brothers and my best friend Jordan. I had two best men at the wedding. It was my brother Alex, who couldn't make it, so my brother Andrew read his speech, and my best friend Jordan. And our relationship, both of those relationships have grown up under that guise of like being able to rib each other but still love each other. And so when it came to the best man speeches, essentially I was giving them an open mic and all of our history together saying, you can talk to all these people whom I love and very close to, and please don't tell them any stories that get me fired. I was so worried. But luckily, actually, between the two of us, Julie came out much worse on her maid of honor speech than I did on my best men speech. Very loving speeches. My middle brother got my older brother to say he loved me. It was wild. And I think Jordan was nice because he's a good person, love him very much, but also I'll be giving his best man speech, and I think it was more of like a, hey, I was nice to you. Please don't destroy me. We'll see how it works out. But we all have these people in our lives that are close, and if you think you don't have people that are close to you, more than likely you're just not giving the people around you enough credit. Like no one, I would say 99% of the time, no one in here has no one that they're not close to. We all have people that we let into our lives and let into this closer inner circle, these closer relationships, these deeper parts of who we are and kind of who we reveal to be. Whether it be by blood, whether it be family, or whether it be by choice, the friends you make or the families you kind of make along the way. I've been at this church, believe it or not, just shy of 4 years. You realize that December of 2019 was my first, December 2nd of 2019 was my start date here. We're coming up on 4 years, which it feels like it's been 20 and 5, or 5 weeks. It's been a wild journey here. But what I've noticed of this church is that there's not a lot of strangers in this church. There's not a lot of people that you're just like, there's kind of passive acquaintances. This is a very tight-knit church. I'm not talking about like in a bad niche kind of segregated way, but there's a lot of family here at this church. It's kind of a unique experience I haven't had a lot of other places. A lot of people here are very involved with one another. It's a great thing to see. But ironically, and I've noticed this over my 28 years as a son and a friend, these relationships also tend to be some of the ones we are most closed off to when we talk about our faith. Whether they're believers or not. So whether you know that your family or friend is a believer, it tends to be the people we go to last with living out our faith in front of, or living through our faith in front of. We tend to be most apprehensive when it talks about faith because either we're nervous about what's going to happen or we don't know what their reaction's going to be. Last week, Jason told the story of the coworker he had in the oil when he was working in the oil fields, and he said, "Yeah, no, I go to church." The guy said, "Oh, I didn't know you were a Christian." So, but people who like are truly your close inner relationships, that's not usually a surprise. Like I would say, if they're a close personal friend of yours or family member, they probably know you're a Christian. If they don't, they probably aren't that close. And if they really don't, but they are that close, you're a really good liar and we need to talk more. But we tend to keep this part of our life away from our closer relationships. I'm not saying always, I'm not saying blanket statements, but it's just something I've noticed over my relatively short life. But why do we do this? Why is it that the people that we're supposed to be closest with and the people that are supposed to be the most involved in the most intimate parts of our life, the thing that should matter to us most, we tend to keep separate? I think there's two main reasons that we do it. First, I think we like to think faith by proximity works most of the time. What does that mean? That just as long as I'm kind of nearby, they're next to me, and I inform them of my church-like activities, and they kind of see me doing nice things, eventually that's either going to rub off on them or they're going to see Jesus through me. We try to make it a very passive, unintentional act, whereas just like as long as I'm nearby, it's going to be good. But the second bigger one that I think honestly scares us more is status quo. We like to be able to maintain these relationships as they are. The reality is with the gospel, like we talk about it with the world all the time, that like, yes, when we preach the gospel and we're telling truth, like people are going to be mad at us, people are not going to like us, people are going to reject us. And we know that inherently, but then when it comes to our families, when it comes to our friends, when it comes to our close relationships, we hesitate. Because you don't want the people you love the most thinking less of you. You don't want the people you love the most not wanting to talk to you, trying to avoid you at family gatherings. We don't want things to happen that push them away from us. Because these relationships mean a lot to us. They wouldn't be close relationships if they didn't. Like, yes, blood is a great tire of people that will be in your life all the time, but it's not a guarantee. Families break up and split apart and reject each other. Brothers don't talk to brothers. Sisters don't talk to sisters. Sons and daughters don't talk to parents for whatever reason. So blood is a good tie, but it's not a permanent one, and we know that. And the relationships we choose, like we can choose to love each other and be with each other, but we can easily choose to push each other away. And so it's this nervousness that of like, oh, what if I just say, hey, I want you to come to church on Sunday, and they're like, I don't do all that religious stuff, man, and honestly, if this is going to be a relationship, I don't want to. We're afraid that they're just going to push us away, and then we tell ourselves like, well, then I got to do faith by proximity, because if they're not around me, they're not like, I'm their last hope of finding Jesus. If they're not nearby, I can't save them. But then when they're nearby, we never take any steps to move forward in this relationship with them, to call out things we may see in their life that need to change. Like I said, this applies to believers and non-believers in our close friendships and our close family. And so when they're nearby, then we just don't do anything. And it's just this cycle that repeats itself of, I'm nearby, hopefully they'll see it. Oh, maybe I should say something. Well, I don't want to say something, because what if they go away? What if what if this means I'm just without them for the rest of my life? So we don't shake the status quo. And we make that long-term choice based off a temporary decision. Is going to kind of what I mean by that? Because when we talk about what we're sharing with our faith, we're talking about an eternal thing. We're not just talking about a way they live life until they die. We're talking about there is life after death. And so when we often push people off, we're talking about this temporary thing that we're worried that they might be mad at us for a bit, but it has an eternal consequence. And so we hide part of who we are to try to maintain what we have now. It's there I want to jump into our passage for today, which is going to be Matthew 5:13 through 16. That's right. If you thought we were done with the Sermon on the Mount, we're not. Do you want to know a secret? You're never done with the Sermon on the Mount. So, Matthew 5:13. You are the salt of the earth, but if salt loses its saltiness, how can it be made salty again? It is no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled underfoot. Salt had the purpose of being primarily a food preservative in the old world. It would prevent rot and spoilage and decay from coming into the meat and the nutrients you needed to survive. Also, it was used as a food flavoring. How many of you have had an unsalted steak? Some of you like unsalted, well-done steaks with ketchup. And Becky, we pray for you every week. And don't worry, I was aware of that before that. I've had Midwestern cuisine. It needs more salt. But salt wasn't just this thing for flavor. Like I said, it was preserve, and it was also this analogy to we are salt and light. And light we'll get into in later part of this work, but we are to be the thing that helps preserve and enhance the people and lives around us. Salt that is no longer salty doesn't serve a purpose. It's just a clear grain of sand at that point. It doesn't serve much function. The verse says it right in the passage. If salt loses its saltiness, all it's good is to be walked on. It serves no purpose. There is no point to saltless salt. At that point, it's just matter that exists. And it could be cast aside, it could be held onto, but it's not going to make a difference. We continue on in the passage. You are the light of the world. A town built on a hill cannot be hidden. Neither do people light a lamp and put it under a bowl. Instead, they put it on a stand, and it gives light to everyone in the house. That's that first part I want to talk about real quick. A town on a hill cannot hide its light. How many people here are road trippers? People, like, when you go places, you don't want to fly, you want to drive. Yeah. So I grew up, both my parents were teachers, and so we road tripped. I was blessed enough to road trip every summer pretty much my entire life, and some winters, but like the only time I remember flying was when we had a short time window and we had to get to Washington or Hawaii. And my dad, if he could have afforded to build a bridge to Hawaii, he would have tried. But we drove everywhere. And I can tell you, as a kid who had trouble not going to the bathroom on road trips more than or less than every 2 hours, coming over a hill and seeing lights reflect off the clouds was a sign of hope. You'd see those lights, you're cresting a hill, you're like, there's a town up there. And then when I was in the Midwest or the South, usually I was disappointed because it was some kind of manufacturing plant in the middle of nowhere that looked like a city at a distance. Then you get closer, you're like, they're not going to let me use the bathroom there. And then you pass the sign that says rest stop 100 miles, and you're like, oh, there goes these pants. But towns on a hill can't hide their light. It's true in our reality, but it's true when we try to talk about our own journey with Jesus and our own faith. It's that when you accept Jesus into your heart and you become a reflection of who he is, you emanate his light. You are a town on a hill, and you reflect light to all things around you. You can't control where your light hits. It hits all things around you, and you can't hide it. If there is a town on a hill not emanating any light, it is abandoned and dead. There is no life there. There is no hope. There is only the semblance of what used to be and not what is. So he calls this, you are a town built on a hill who cannot be hidden. You do not get the choice of whether or not your light is seen. Your light will be seen. And he goes on to say in 15, neither do people light a lamp and put it under a bowl. Instead, they put it on a stand, and it gives light to everyone in the house. There's 2 points of language I want to point out there. Or the first part is, why would you light a lamp if you were just going to cover it in a bowl? It's kind of pointless. It's like cooking food and then immediately throwing it away. Which, if you have an unsalted, well-done steak, that's what you should do. But lighting a lamp, when you light a fire, there is a chemical reaction. There is a chemical change that takes place that ignites light to appear. Fire is a reaction to energy being released. That's just basic chemistry. That's what it is. A change occurs, and light is now being emitted. Why would you go through all the work to light a lantern? Now, keep in mind, this isn't like, our lanterns today where it's click, click, it's on. This is an oil lantern. Had to be filled, had to be maintained, had to be pulled out. You had to actually go in and try to light it instead of just turn it. Why would you go through all the work and all the change you need to make light emanate from that just to cover it? Like the town on the hill emanating no light, you ruin its purpose by covering it. And as anybody who's been through any basic chemistry class will tell you, if you cover a flame, you eventually just snuff it out. You rob it of all oxygen. It will not light anymore. So regardless of whether it's the bowl or not, once you remove the bowl, the light will be out. And I don't think the inclusion and gives light to everyone in the house is an accidental, because clearly he's talking about lighting lanterns in your home and keeping your house lit. But your house is also your most personal and trusted area. The people who live in your house, the people who live with you, should be some of the people you trust the most, some of your closest relationships. And whoever you choose to include in this house will be touched by the light of the lantern you light and will be robbed of that light if you decide to cover it. Putting the lamp under the bowl makes the light pointless. And then 16, in the same way, let your light shine before others, that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven. Like with the lantern, it's one thing to say you have light. It's another thing to show people that light. This is a gift. The light that we shine, that we reflect off because we are emulating Jesus, is a gift given to us by grace and love. And it's in that same spirit that we should share it with people. And we do not do it to show off how bright our light is. People see our good deeds, but we know they're not because of who we are, but because of who God is. Bragging about the light that we reflect would be like the moon bragging about the light it shines at night. Those of you who don't know, I think everyone should, the moon does not make its own light. The moon is only bright because the sun shines on it first. So for the moon to say to the earth, hey, look how well I'm keeping you lit, is dishonest. Because that's not where the light's coming from. If the moon had to emit its own light, we would be in darkness. And in much the same way the moon reflects the sun's light, we also reflect the sun's light. When we are Christians, we are an emulation of Christ, imago Dei, made in the image of God. We are reflection of the light Christ shines. It's kind of here I want to take a sidebar for a bit, and I want to talk about someone who's been in my life. And I feel like this is the point in the sermon where often pastors will talk about someone in their close circle that they've been close to, but I kind of want to take a step back and talk about somebody who in my journeys meant a lot to me, who was the light that reflected onto me to bring me out of darkness, the person who reflected the light onto me. And when I think about all of my close relationships in my life, besides my wife, the person who probably knows me best is one of the guys I mentioned earlier. His name's Jordan Pacheco. He's been my best friend since birth. The guy I said, we were basically born together. We've known each other for pretty much 28 years at this point. So just for a little bit of context, there we both are. If you can't tell, I've had the same facial structure since I was 1. So I'm there on the left in blue, and the kid on the tractor who looks like his Benadryl's about to kick in. That's my best friend Jordan. Behind me is my dad. We're having a kind of family fun day at the lake there. Not this lake, Lake Elsinore. A much worse lake. But just throughout my life, different spots. Top left there, we're at our high school. We're doing a thing, but he tried to get going as a social media trend called the pose, and it's just this. It's just doing this. At the bottom left there, it's very apt since we went this last summer. That is me and Jordan at our NYC 2011, in Louisville, Kentucky, and a couple of our other youth group mates in the background there. But then there's one on the right, it's me and Jordan at mine and Julie's wedding, where Jordan was one of my best men, and we're actually recreating a photo we've done many times where I've picked him up and held him. But that's to say, this man has been a part of my life and a close friend for a long time. He blurs that line between friend and brother. And besides my wife, love you, honey, besides my wife, he's been one of the biggest blessings in my life. He cares for everyone around him, even when he owes them nothing. He's compassionate and he's hardworking. He's got a bit of an ego, and I know I'm boosting it a little bit by talking about him this way. But he would also tell you that. But as core, he knows all of his blessings aren't because of anything he did, but because he knows God's love. He knows God loves him. And don't get me wrong, he's a hard worker. He's worked for every single thing he's had in this life. It's not taking that away from him, but he knows where that motivation and that strength he has comes from. Because he's been blessed by God, and he won't hesitate to point back to God as his source and his strength. Also, he has an uninhibited love for those around him and a grace and a patience that seems supernatural. And it's there in that point that I want to talk about him, because it's that quality of Jordan where I got to encounter the light of Jesus reflected back at me. So just a quick background on me. Born and raised in Southern California, most of you probably knew that, but most of you probably didn't know, is I was pretty heavily bullied in middle school. I wasn't one of those kids who was tiny one day and then big the next day. I was just always a big kid. I entered high school as a freshman at 6 foot 230. Always a big kid, but being the always kid who was a bit bigger, even though I wasn't, there in those photos, I thought I was fat. I'm much heavier than I am now, but that kid saw himself the way that I am now. And that became much of a part of my identity because in middle school I was bullied for my size and my weight quite a bit. And when you have those two options, or when you have that happen to you, you kind of have two options. Either you let it affect you and really bring you down, or you try to own it and just make it a part of who you are. But that's not really necessarily a healthy coping mechanism either. So what that resulted in is a very angry kid who was very mad at the world, who thought he was justified to be fully angry with everything happening. And yes, some unfortunate things did happen, but in reality, I had way more blessings than I did just bad things happen in my life. But that kid there was angry at a lot. I had to be the tough guy no one wanted to mess with. I had to be the guy who was stoic all the time. I had to be the one that, our friend groups growing up were built on being able to rib each other a little bit, but I wanted my friends to be just a little bit afraid to do it. Because if I felt like they were just not a lot afraid, but they were just a little afraid of me, I controlled the narrative. I controlled the conversation. I felt like I couldn't be hurt or harmed. I would separate myself from everybody at times because I just didn't feel like being around people. I would I'd be part of the pack, I'd be part of the group, and I would just go off on my own. And through all of that, Jordan didn't let it happen. He took the risk of constantly talking to an angry, confrontational kid who would have rather torn his head off at certain points than to accept that he was being shown love. He reminded me that Jesus loved me even when I felt like nothing loved me. And when I was in these modes of anger and loneliness and wanting to separate myself, Jordan was the one who left the 99 to come after the one. Jordan, in no uncertain terms, was the town reflecting light down to the valley that I was seeing from the valley floor. Jordan was the one chasing after me with a lantern he had lit, letting me know, hey, you don't have to be lost. You don't have to run into this darkness. You don't have to be alone. There is more for you. There is a way you can see. He had a supernatural amount of grace and patience and love for a kid. I tell the youth group all the time that when I talk about my past, I call them kind of previous versions of myself. So I refer to the kid in these photos, these high school photos, as high school Anthony, because high school Anthony is a different human. You didn't want to know high school Anthony. He had a supernatural amount of love and grace and patience for a kid who definitely did not deserve it. Much in the same way that God has grace and love for us in ways we don't deserve because we did not deserve what his son did for us on the cross and all the promises he's kept for us over the years. Jordan reflected that same promise we read about in Scripture to me in my life when I needed it most. And to this day, he is my best friend. And I don't see that changing until one of us dies. Probably me first, but for a long time, that was the light that was nearby that could shine to me. When you choose to be a follower of Christ, you don't get the option to hide your light. So like we talked about with the house on, or the town on the hill, or the lantern under the bowl, it makes it pointless. It doesn't reach anybody around you. And especially in our close relationships, because how we minister to those close to us kind of determines how we treat the rest of the world around us. Because you build in and work out. And you can try to say, like, oh, well, no, I'm going to skip over the people around me. I'm going to go to the people who I work with. But what happens when those people you work with kind of come from the outer circle and then become part of your inner circle? And now those people that you tried to avoid, your inner circle, having those tough conversations and having those hard moments, those hard Jesus moments where you need to be a light on a hill happen. And they come from your outer circle to your inner circle. And it's no different because you never figured this part out. It's been one of the faults of the church. We bring people from out, we bring them in, and then we don't know what to do with them. We're really good at getting in the doors. We're really good at keeping people. And I don't just mean in this building. I don't want to just, once again, the church is not the building. The building is a place the church meets. Every interaction with those close to us is setting a precedent in the minds for what follows. Like I said, there's probably not a lot of people you consider close friends, family members that don't know what you believe. You are their example. You are the mirror that they are holding up when they say, I want to see Christ in that person. I'm trying to see Christ in that person. Whatever you do is that reflection. And to repeat Jason from last week, is something he said a lot during his message. What we do today matters more than what the future holds. I know most of us in here have someone in our lives that we love dearly that it just feels like it's impossible or hard to talk about God with. I have people like that in my own family. I'm not up here saying, I've talked to every single person in my life about Jesus and they know where I stand. No, it's something I'm still working on. There's people in my own inner circle that I'm afraid to talk to. Believers, non-believers, it doesn't matter. People who we feel it's easier to keep quiet about Jesus just so we can keep them around. Just so we don't have to feel we have to lose those close to us. People we're afraid to be losing by being too Christian, whatever that means. And I want to clarify before we kind of go forward, this isn't a call that you need to start going up to all your close friends and family and bashing them over the head with a Bible. We tried that for a while. It didn't work. A saying I love is, just because we call it a sword doesn't mean you get to use it to cut people down. This is an excuse to be a jerk and just yell Bible verses at those close to you and just claim it was tough love. Doesn't work. You can't beat people with Jesus. We hold fast to what is true, but condemnation is never and will never be our job. What this is a call to is to be a reflection of the light of Jesus to those around us, regardless of how terrifying those situations are going to be, regardless of how scary it might be, that we're afraid of the reactions of those who are closest to us. We have to be that light. We have to be salt. We have to be the town on the hill reflecting light, because if we are not, there is no hope. If we cover our own light, not only will we ruin, not saying we're the only ones who will ever be able to show them Jesus, but we're ruining our chance to be part of God's mission and our call in our life to reach those for Jesus. Because ultimately, that's what this is all about. The Christian endeavor is essentially one of people and getting people to know Jesus. And by covering our light and snuffing it out, we rob people of that opportunity. It may not be the only one they get, but you don't know that. Because what we do now matters more than what we do tomorrow, because tomorrow's not guaranteed. We are to be the love and grace that we can only exemplify because his power in us radiating out. Not because of any skill or because we gave them the right Bible verse on a card or we handed them their 500th Christian bookmark. But because we are true reflections of the light of Jesus. Say to go. In that same way, let your light shine before others, that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven. They may be your good deeds, but they're his power and his light, and they should always point back to him. You do not get to hide your light. So I want to leave us with some practical things, because this is a very practical series. And I'm going to steal something else from Jason, but to be fair, he stole it from Dabo Sweeney first, so I think it's all right. Two wrongs make a right. But it's that concept Jason talked about last week. You live by joy to live with joy. But I want to contextualize it for our message this week. So, joy. What does the first J stand for? Jesus. Very good. You almost got the call and response. If we want to reflect God's light to those around us, we have to follow after him. If we want to be the image that we are reflecting to people, we have to know what he looks like. If I were to tell you, if I hadn't shown you a picture of Jordan, and I were to tell, hey, Joseph, I want you to paint a picture of Jordan, what does he look like? I'm not showing you. It's not going to work. He may get some things right. You get a lot of things wrong. If you want to reflect Jesus, you have to know who Jesus is first. You have to follow him. You have to make him the core part of who you are. You have to make his will yours first. We have to do all things through the lens of Jesus. We have to see people how Jesus sees people. It is only then that we have the ability and the power to have the grace and love that it takes to be in the ministry. Because remember, we're all in the ministry. Just a couple of us get to do it formally. It's not our own power, because if we try to do it on our own power, we will crumble quick. We get to know him through his gospels, through his story, through the message, through the Bible, through the story told through Old and New Testament that's still being told today of a God who loved us first, long before we were ever here, while we were here, and long after we're gone. We get to know him through prayer, where we speak. We get this opportunity to have this close personal relationship with the one who created us and the one who loved us first. You have to know Jesus and follow Jesus to be able to do any of this. What's the O stand for? Others. We're getting there. Remembering that when it comes to salvation, what is best for them now may be most difficult for you currently. The things that we have to say, that the things that we know are best, that God's calling us to, be hard for us to deal with. Will mean difficult conversations. Will mean living our life in such a way that we only reflect God's light and not our own. When it also comes to others, you don't get to keep your life to yourself or lose your saltiness. We have to be willing to be present and speak up when called to. And this can be more difficult sometimes than the example pastors always go to is if God said, you're in a grocery store and God said, hey, I want you to go up to that cashier and tell him about Jesus. A lot of us wouldn't because, hey, that's a stranger, but almost it's a little easier with a stranger because that could be the only interaction you have and then it's on with your day. But if God says, hey, Anthony, you need to talk to your brother about God. That's my brother. He's hopefully going to be part of my life for the rest of my life. What if it goes bad? What if every time I see him after this, it's soured by what I say to him, God? What if it just changes our whole relationship? Or worse, what if he doesn't see me ever again? But that is a selfish inclination. That is just my desire to want to keep status quo, to keep things happy, because I love my brother and I know he loves me, and I want to keep that because it feels nice and it feels good. But once again, it's a temporary solution to a permanent problem. We'll be happy now, but when it comes to eternity, that's a different story. But also, like Jason said last week, sometimes it's knowing when to be silent when you just want to open your mouth. Because sometimes you want to yell Jesus at people. Sometimes you just get so frustrated and annoyed with what people are doing, you just want to take that Bible and start hitting. Make Bible thumper a literal term. But knowing that sometimes silence and just being present is what's called for. I'm not saying, I know what I said earlier, sometimes it sounded like might have been saying that being just around people isn't good enough, which yes, just being around them is not, but being present, intentionally present with people is important. And sometimes your words are what's not needed. It's also accepting that someone else may play a bigger part in their salvation than you will. And that's a difficult thing that I completely understand. As a youth pastor, with my youth, when we're at events, I feel if they're going to have a breakthrough, I have to be there for them. I have to be the one that they talk to. Reality, when I'm at youth events, there's a lot of other qualified people in the room. There's a whole bunch of pastors and youth leaders, and sometimes you just have to know, it doesn't have to be me. And that hurts here a little bit, because you feel like the ones closest to you, you should be the one saving. But sometimes the way you come to them in their moment as Jesus is letting somebody else be the reflection for them. It takes a little bit of pride to swallow. But it also means you might be waiting for a bit. Because once again, I feel we all have that person in our life that there's that moment that's coming. And maybe it hasn't come yet because we haven't talked to them, but maybe it's just right now God hasn't put that person in their life yet. And that patience it takes to wait for that is hard, but the glory that comes from it is greater. In John 15, Jesus says, there is no greater love than one can have than to lay his life down for his friends. It's that with Jesus, that sacrificial love that we talk about. And yes, in that passage, it is foreshadowing Jesus' crucifixion on the cross later. Because also in that passage, he goes on to say, I no longer call you servants, I call you friends, because you do what the Father says. And because you are with me on that ministry, you are my friends, not my servants. Because all we do is to love others to glorify God. And so yes, in that sense, he's also partially talking about a literal death, laying down one's life for a friend, but also dying to oneself and sacrificially loving those around us is one of the greatest things we can do. Because once again, how we love those who are directly around us is a reflection of how we will love those who are further away from us. And the last point, what is why? Yourself. This is going to be kind of a weird point, but it's going to go along with what we just kind of talked about. Take the weight of salvation off your shoulders. Now, what I'm not saying there is don't go out and be Jesus and light to people, but remember you aren't the one saving them. You don't have that power. You are not the ones who can declare them righteous and therefore justified. You do not have saving power. But when we go around with the stress that we are the ones that have to save them, we have to save them, that pressure will crush you, and it'll crush you fast. I've watched it happen. It's happened to me. When Jordan was right by my side during a lot of that, yes, he had hardships and there were things that were difficult, but the weight of salvation wasn't on his shoulders because he was doing Christ's work through him. But he knew that it would be eventually that God saved me, that God would show me some kind of light. He just had to be present, and he had to be ready, and he had to be obedient. But he was not the Savior. We only have one Savior, and he died on the cross for us and lives now in heaven alongside God. And last I checked, Jordan's in San Diego. But also, as Jason said last week, find your Sabbath. Your rest and your peace in God. Because you can't be on 100% of the time. Once you are a Christian 100% of the time. You are for Jesus 100% of the time. But if you do not take time to rest and build up yourself and build your relationship with God and find your peace and your place to be with him, you are not going to be able to help people find theirs. If you don't know what peace is in God, you cannot share that with others. So yes, we are always, almost constantly surrounded by those who we consider our close relationships, our friends, our family, whatever you want to call it. But you still do factor into the equation. You aren't something that we cancel out under the fraction and just throw away. You do have to rest and care for yourself. But like Jason said, the moment you try to put yourself before others or before Jesus is when this word goes apart. Because part of the reason I like the analogy of joy in the series, and I decided to kind of reuse it this week, was because J-O-Y, joy, Jesus, others, yourself, it makes sense. What happens if you put yourself before Jesus? You Joe. Or you put others before Jesus? Aji. It's nonsense. The word becomes nonsense. Because we're doing something that's complete and utter nonsense. Jesus, others, yourself. Because I know in my life, I just talked about with Jordan, that if he hadn't been that close personal friend to me that he was and that he still is, and we've been that to each other over time, and I've had people I was that for in my life, but I know if he was not there, I'm not here. I don't mean that in a sense, dark sense, that I think I would have committed suicide or anything, but I know I'm not on this stage. I know I'm not at this church. The part you play in in the lives of those around you, directly around you, has great, immense effect on what happens in your world. When people talk about wanting to make political change, oftentimes people, I think, are a little too ambitious because they want to make it immediately at the national level. But do you know how you really change your world? Your world is not every single thing on this planet. Your world is what's around you. It's the things closest to you that mean the most to you. Start there. Because once again, and I'll say it and I mean it, if we can't reflect Jesus to those directly next to us, how do we expect our light to go further to those who are further from us? It won't. In a minute, we're going to be taking the communion supper. We are going to be coming forward, participating in the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ. The sacrifice he made to all of us. A sacrificial death because of his sacrificial love he lived out. Because I know I just talked about the people around us not being too ambitious, but Jesus was God, so the world was all his close inner circle, basically. Because he knew each one of us personally, but he made that choice to die for us. And he lived out that love first, so we knew what we needed to emulate out. So as we take communion, if you need to, if you want to come to the altars, they'll be open. Otherwise, Sherry and the group is going to lead us in a song we may recognize from a certain movie property, but certainly has history long past that. But sit, contemplate what we've heard today, come gather communion, and we'll take communion together. Thank you for being here today and supporting the ministry in New Life Church. We have two ways to give. We have the box in the back, right there between the two double doors. We also have our website, newlifeatthelake.com. Any way that you can give, the way you're financially supporting us, just once again, thank you so much. I do want to throw out one more quick reminder that tonight at 5, there will be pizza. I'm a youth pastor. I have to attract you with food first. There will be pizza, and we will be packing the Christmas boxes. Please let Audrey know that you are coming so we know how much pizza to order, because if we're promising pizza, we want pizza to be there available for you. Either that or you better get there early enough to make sure you get some. But yes, if you could let Audrey know as soon as possible that you're going to be there. And please come and join us and participate in this wonderful ministry that means so much to those across the world. Thank you for supporting that ministry as greatly as you have. But that being said, that's it? Oh, I thought you had something else. Benediction? Thank you. I have permission to do benediction from Sherry. But thank you for coming. Go out and bless your community. Bless those around you. You are dismissed.